Good evening, everyone. My name is Sarah Panik, and I'm an Education USA advisor at the US-UK Fulbright Commission, and I'm delighted to be here with you this evening. Just before we get started, I just want a word of caution that I unfortunately had a bit of a cold over the weekend, and I've got some lingering congestion, which seems to act up more when I'm speaking. So presenting a webinar is an unfortunate time to be dealing with such a set of circumstances. So hopefully all will be okay. We'll get into the swing of things and everything will be okay. I've got plenty of water here and some cough drops as well. But if for some reason I end up needing to drop off for any reason, I'll put some information in the chat for some follow-up. But hopefully all will be okay. And as we get started, I'd like to introduce a little bit more about myself. As you might be able to tell from my accent, I am not originally from the UK. I am from Chicago in the US, where I completed both my undergraduate degree and my master's degree. But I've been living in London now for the past 7 years and working at the US-UK Fulbright Commission for the past 5 years. And I'm just very excited to be here presenting this webinar this evening. And in tonight's webinar, we'll be talking about studying in the USA at the undergraduate level. And we'll talk about the process of how to go about choosing a university in the US, how to fund your studies, and what the application process is like. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions that you'll be able to enter in the Q&A box. I do ask that you hold off on asking any questions until the end, just in case I answer those questions as I'm presenting, but you can go ahead and maybe make a note of them for yourself somewhere so that you can remember to ask the question at the end. I also want to say that this is being recorded. The session is being recorded. And so I will be sending out the recording to anybody who is registered for the webinar. So if you face any kind of technical issues and connectivity this evening, or if you end up having to drop off early, know that you will be sent the recording. All right, so without further ado, let's get started. So just to tell you a little bit more about who we are the US-UK Fulbright Commission, and we were actually established more than 70 years ago in the aftermath of World War II by a man named Senator Fulbright. And Senator Fulbright himself actually studied in the UK as a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, and he thought that the best way to avoid a third world war would be to encourage cultural and educational exchange. So we were born from that, and we are a not-for-profit organization that's jointly funded by both the US and the UK governments to promote peace and cultural understanding through educational exchange. And we do that in a number of different ways. So one way that we do that is by offering scholarships for postgraduate study and research in both the US and the UK. And then we also offer an advisory service to assist students, parents, and advisors with applying for US universities. And the advisory service is part of the Education USA network, which is a US Department of State network of over 400 international student advising centers throughout the world. And our aim as Education USA advisors is to offer free, unbiased, up-to-date advice to help UK students to study in the US. And we're actually the only official source of US study in the UK. So first, I want to start out by talking a little bit about why so many students choose to study in the US for their studies each year. And you'll see some of the reasons up here on the screen. And I'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail. So the first is really just the quality and the reputation of US universities. There's over 4,500 US universities that are offering undergraduate degrees compared to about 120 here in the UK. So within that 4,500, there's a huge range of personality and style. Although I do caution you to pay not too much attention to rankings, just because it's better to instead focus on fit. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. As you might imagine, with 4,500 universities, there's a lot of high quality universities that you've probably never even heard of. Also, going to the US offers the opportunity to experience campus life. US universities are known for being vibrant places. They're known for encouraging students to be involved outside of the classroom. They really want to educate the student as a whole, not just academically, but as a person, and extracurriculars are a way to do that. And that can be from all sorts of things, whether it be the traditional participating in a sport or a student government, or maybe just going to cheer on the American football team at your university. But there's all sorts of different clubs that are available on campus And if there is one that isn't there that you would like to be, you'll be able to start one. And so that's another reason that students choose to go to the US. Another huge reason that students are interested in going to the US for their studies is academic flexibility. So in the US, we have something that's called the liberal arts. And what that is the ability to study classes in a variety of different subjects. It's kind of a more well-rounded curriculum. And you're able to do this before you decide what you want to specialize or major in. So some students, they already know what they want to study. They go into university and they know that, and that's fine. A lot of students either don't know yet, or they go in thinking they want to study something, but they start taking classes in that and realize it's not really what they want, and they want to change their mind, and that's okay in the US. And so a lot of students really like having that flexibility, especially if you're somebody who, when it was time to kind of narrow down your classes at A levels, for instance, you had a really hard time figuring out how you were going to choose just 3 or 4 subjects from all the things you wanted to study. Going to the US gives you the possibility to take classes in this variety of different subjects. And as I said, some students go, they already know what they want to study, and that's completely fine too. But you still get this opportunity to take classes in all these different subjects and learn about other things. So for instance, I've worked with a student who was really passionate about computer science, knew he wanted to study computer science, went to the US to pursue that computer science degree, also had a passion for philosophy. So on top of his major in computer science, was able to minor, which means taking just like a small set of classes in philosophy, and kind of maintain that interest as well. So as you can imagine, this is a really big reason for students wanting to go to the US each year. Also, this next one here might be one that surprises you a bit, but the funding opportunities available. We'll discuss this in much more detail later on, but there are a lot of opportunities to fund your studies and to find scholarships in the US compared to the loan-based program that's here in the UK. And then, of course, going to the US offers the opportunity to internationalize your CV. Studying abroad is appealing to employers. It shows that you have a boldness to do something different. You've got interpersonal skills, cross-cultural communication skills. You will build a network of friends and professional contacts around the world. And then also being in the US, you have a lot of student job opportunities. You'll be able to work up to 20 hours per week during term time, 40 hours per week during holidays, and for up to a year after graduation to kind of help build up that CV. And lastly, going to the US offers the opportunity to learn about a new culture. And this is another top reason that students want to go to the US. The US is a big country. It spans 6 different time zones. It's got huge diversity in geography and cultures. They have long summer holidays, sometimes all the way from May to August, a long summer break to kind of explore and travel. And also just living on a US campus offers the opportunity to get to know the US culture. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the key differences between the US and the UK. So as you might already be aware, programs in the US are typically longer programs, 4 years for a bachelor's degree versus 3 in the UK. And that's to allow for that liberal arts curriculum, that ability to take a variety of different classes and get that well-rounded education. Admission in the US is to the university as a whole, as opposed to a particular academic department, and which again allows you to choose your major a couple of years into your studies, or change your major if you go in thinking you want to study one thing and change your mind. There's also less government control over universities. So there's more institutional diversity and freedom. That also means there's no set fees or centralized admissions process. The application process is slightly longer and more in depth because the admissions process is more holistic and much more than just grades, as we'll talk about later. And another thing that's really important to know is that you apply for funding alongside your application for admission. And so you'll be taking that into consideration from the very beginning. And then one side note here is also just that law and medicine are something that are studied at the postgraduate level in the US. They are not studied at the undergraduate level. And then just a little bit about the terminology that you may or may not have already heard me using some of this terminology. But when we're talking about US high school, we're talking about grades 9 through 12 in the US. In England and Wales, that corresponds to years 10 through 13. In Northern Ireland, 11 through 14. And in Scotland, that's S3 through S6. You may also hear me refer to a college, a university, a school, an institution. that all just means university. And so you'll hear me using that interchangeably. Apologies, just a moment. Having a bit of coughing, which will hopefully subside and be able to continue on. I'll keep you posted. In the US, we refer to classes and courses to what you call modules. And then instead of referring to a course in the UK, we call it a degree program or a major. So this is just helpful to know as you do your research on programs. And then just a little bit of a timeline for you to plan. If you are interested in applying to the US, we typically recommend starting to research universities about a year to a year and a half before you plan to enroll. So that's typically at the end of year 12 here in the UK. And then you'd want to register for any required admissions exams and aim to take them in the summer after year 12. And then in the autumn of your final year of high school, you'll finalize a selection of where you're going to be applying, and throughout that autumn period, put together that application and submit. And then about kind of the spring time, the winter time, spring time, you'll receive those admissions decisions, and based on those decisions, decide where it is that you want to go. And then in the spring, you'll apply for that visa. You will plan for your pre-departure. We've got lots of information about this on our website. And in the summer, usually about kind of mid-August time, mid to late August time, you'll begin your studies. So that is a bit earlier than here in the UK. All right, so now we'll talk about choosing a university, which is a really important step in the process of applying to a US university. And it's really important in this step to think about being flexible. As I said earlier, there's over 4,500 universities in the US, which means it's a daunting process to narrow down your prospects, but we're going to discuss some strategies that you can implement in the choosing process. So it's important to know the context of the US as you consider applying to US study and choosing which universities you'd like to apply to. As I said, there's no national set standard for universities, so universities are free to choose their own fees, course structure, student environments, and that means that there is a lot of variety amongst institutions, which can be a good thing. It can also be daunting. But with so many different types of universities, there's bound to be a university that's a good fit for you. I also want to mention funding here, because if funding is important to you, it's something that needs to be considered from step one of the choosing process. You'll want to be sure that if funding is important, you're only applying to universities that offer financial aid to international students. And we'll talk more about this, but note that it's a really important step in researching universities. And also, you'll want to make sure that you're also completing your UCAS applications alongside your US universities. Perhaps you'll apply to some universities in the UK that will allow you to do a year abroad. And so make sure that you're mindful of those deadlines and applying, having a plan for the UK, just in case your US university applications don't go as planned. All right, so now I want to talk about fit, the first step in the choosing process. And we focus on this term a lot here. And what this basically means is finding the school and the program that's going to be the best fit for you and your personal and your academic interests. So the way that you do that is, first, you kind of consider what's most important to you, both inside and outside of the classroom. You might be thinking about the types of programs and departments that are available, the location, the availability of funding, as I mentioned, the campus size, the academic environments. For instance, do you want to be somewhere where the environment is quite rigorous, competitive, or somewhere that's inclusive or supportive? So you'll want to start thinking about which of these factors are important to you and prioritizing those. So, you know, if you don't like the cold and snow, then maybe you're not going to be looking at the East Coast too much. I mean, if you're trying to save some money in the cost of living, then maybe you won't be living in an urban place because that will be more expensive than a rural place. And we will really encourage you to think beyond the rankings and instead think of these variety of factors. Rankings in the US are just not the same as they are in the UK. They don't necessarily rate the quality of teaching or the graduate prospects. And some give weight to how much money a university has, or they just invite universities to peer rank themselves. So while rankings might be a useful tool and maybe just identifying the names of universities that maybe you've never heard of before, it shouldn't be the only method that you use to choose a university. And within this choosing process, you'll want to make sure that you're only applying to universities that you've researched and that you could see yourself attending for up to 4 years if you're offered a place there. So now that you've thought about all those different factors, and what's important to you and what types of institutions there are, the next step is to use that information to begin researching universities. So unlike with UCAS, you're not limited to 5 universities. In theory, you could apply to as many as you'd like, although for time and financial reasons, we typically recommend applying to no more than 6 to 10 universities. However, to jumpstart your process of choosing, you want to focus on narrowing down those 4,500 institutions to a list of about 10 to 20 schools that you think could be a good fit, and so that you can then research those further. So how do you do that? So on our website, we do have resources under the choosing section of the website that includes a list of links to different search engines that you can use to help the process of narrowing down your choices of universities. So we'll go through an example of one to show what the process looks like. So this one here is called Big Future. And there's a variety of filters on here that you can use, including the type and size of the school, the location, the majors on offer. And this is where all of that thinking of those factors is going to come into play. And something to note about this website in particular is that if funding is a consideration for you, there's a section here called affordability, and then they have a section called financial need met, and you'll be able to select like percentage of need that you would like met, and tick a box titled that they have aid for international students, and then it will filter specifically to a list of universities that offer need-based aid for international students. Although you'll always want to double check on the university website to make sure that the information through the search engine is accurate. So in an example that we've got here, we've put in a variety of different filters to narrow down our list of schools. So here I've just selected that we want to attend a 4-year school, that we'd like it to be small and medium size. We'd like it to be in Ohio, and that it will meet 100% of financial need. And that brought the 3,600 universities that are available in this search engine down to 4 universities, which, as you can imagine, is a much more manageable number to start going into each of these different pages and doing that research. So then what you can do is you can kind of click on the page, and it'll take you through to more information about the university to find out things like application deadlines and a link to their website. You'll be able to note things like the size of the institution, the graduation rate, the average financial aid package, and then find out more information by clicking through to that website. So once you narrow down your options, you'll research them further on the university website, and you'll reach out to them directly. Apologies, one moment. With that goal being to select about 6 to 10 institutions where you'll actually submit an application. And we suggest applying to 2 what we call reach schools, where you'd be thrilled to attend, but it would be a challenge for you to get in. And something to note here is that if you're applying to those really ultra competitive universities, think Yale, Stanford, MIT, Caltech, those types of universities, those are reach schools for everyone, just because of how competitive they are. You'll also want to consider applying to 3 to 4 match schools, where your profile is roughly on par with their average applicants, and then 2 likely admittance schools. You might want to think of this as being kind of similar to your UCAS insurance choice, somewhere where your application is going to be really competitive. And then on the university websites, you'll want to look to see if they offer the profile of the average admitted applicants, what their acceptance rates are, that kind of information. And you can also find out more information on programs, campus virtual tours, student life, sports, student housing, financial aid. And also you'll want to make sure that you check out what resources they have for international students. And then you'll also want to check out the social media channels to get a feel for the college and the university personality. As you might imagine, they often have students that take over these channels so that you can get more insight into what it's like to be a student at the university. So the best place to kind of look for this information is going to be all of those, that university website and those social media channels. So now I just kind of want to give you a taste of just a few of the different universities that are on offer in the US, perhaps some ones that you've never heard of before, just to kind of get you thinking about the variety that's available. So if you're looking for competitive schools, which are small, collaborative, and offer a lot of research opportunities, you might want to consider a liberal arts college like this one here, Middlebury College, which is located in Middlebury, Vermont. It's known to be a liberal and artsy area of the US and known for its beautiful waterfalls and hiking opportunities. Or if you're a female student who loves palm trees and sunshine, you might consider Scripps College, which is a women's college in Claremont, California. Or perhaps you want to experience some Southern hospitality, some warm weather, and some country music. You might look at Vanderbilt University, which is a private research university in Nashville, Tennessee. So as I said, these are just 3 of the many thousands of universities that are on offer, but just wanted to get you thinking about some ones that maybe you haven't quite heard of before and what types of different institutions there are on offer. And I also just want to mention a note on the Ivy League. So the Ivy League, surprisingly to you probably, is historically a sports league between the 8 oldest universities in New England. So it's often compared as being equivalent to the Russell Group, but it's not, in that you can't become a member of the Ivy League. It's a historical league, a historical sports league of these 8 universities that came together to play sports and American football. And so there's no kind of joining it. So for instance, MIT, Stanford, not part of the Ivy League. All of the institutions in the Ivy League are private research universities, which might be your fit, but it might not be. And so it might be that you want to kind of think of some of the other institutions that are available, like the liberal arts colleges, like the women's colleges, maybe some specialist institutions. Liberal arts colleges are also extremely competitive. They offer undergrad research opportunities, but they'll never be the Ivy League. And they're just not as well known in the UK, despite being really top quality schools, really well-known institutions in the US. Another thing to keep in mind is, though we advise you to take rankings with a grain of salt, if you are looking at rankings, the top 1% of US universities would be over 40 institutions. I'm guessing you probably can't name 40 different US universities off the top of your head. And so there are a lot of really top universities that are extremely competitive, that are not ones that you've heard of, that are not in the Ivy League. And so it's just something worth considering. All right, so now that we've talked about choosing a university, I'd like to talk about funding, because as you might imagine, this is one of the top things that we get asked about. So in this section, I want to be both upfront about the costs involved to study in the US, but also dispel some myths related to funding US studies. And one of the things that I want to note here is that finding funding for university is a challenge for both US and international students. And so what we're going to do here is to help you meet this challenge. We're going to run through the different costs that you can anticipate, the different sources of funding that you can pull from, and strategies that you can implement to find funding. So I'll start out by talking about the different costs that you can expect. So just in the application itself, there are costs associated with that. So for example, a university might require an admissions exam, such as the SAT or ACT, which we'll talk about in a little while. And those costs currently cost between $100 to $200 per exam. Each university application is also going to incur a fee of about $50 to $100, although you may be able to apply for a fee waiver for this. And then if you are accepted into a US university, there's going to be a cost for your visa. There's going to be an embassy appointment and a SEVIS fee, and your SEVIS fee is basically the international student database that the Department of Homeland Security uses. And then for the university itself, there's going to be the cost of the tuition and fees. Costs can vary significantly, as I mentioned, since each university can set their own tuition and fees rates. They are mandatory. They usually cover things like the students' union, school athletics, membership to the university gym. Although something to be aware of if you're looking at the cost of attendance on a US university website is that it isn't just the tuition and fees. If you're looking at a cost of attendance, it's also including the room and board, oftentimes personal expenses, sometimes a trip home. And so make sure that, if you're seeing that really big number, be aware that it's often not just the tuition and fees, but also the room and board and some of those other costs. That being said, while the cost of attendance does include those other costs, it doesn't necessarily include everything. So you might need to still consider other living costs like eating out, clothing, entertainment, and the cost of living is going to vary widely depending on where your university is located. And so those are all things to keep in mind. The good news is that there are a variety of funding opportunities available, and it is possible to have an affordable US university education, and many students are able to fully fund their studies without loans. The key is going to be being willing to put in the time and the effort to seek out and apply for that funding. So where does this money come from? Just a moment, just gonna have a little bit more water before we dive into this, make sure I'm good to go. Thank you for your patience. So you'll see these four main sources of funding up here on the screen. And in the US, one of the first sources of funding is from personal and family funds. US universities do expect families to prioritize students' education and invest in that education. And so they are expecting families to put forward some money towards a student's education. And something to keep in mind here is that if students are applying for any kind of need-based aid, and universities are granting that, the amount that they will expect a family to pay is what they believe the family can afford to pay, as opposed to what the family is willing to pay. And so they'll look at a family's income level and all these other factors, and then they will decide how much the family is able to pay and base their financial aid based off of that. That's if you're applying for financial aid and need-based aid. Now, you might be saying, okay, what is that? What is this need-based aid, financial aid? So US universities themselves are actually a huge source of funding for students. There's two main types of aid from a US university: need-based aid and also merit-based scholarships. And it's going to vary how much need a university can meet. So if financial aid is important to you, you'll need to make sure that you're looking for and applying only to universities that are offering financial aid for international students. And we're going to go into more detail about this in a moment. Another source of financial aid is from external funding bodies, so scholarships outside of a university, and we'll talk about that some more. And then lastly, loans. Although a word of caution here, we advise that loans be your final resort, because unless you have dual US citizenship or US permanent residency or somebody in the US to sign, co-sign a loan for you, you won't be able to get a loan in the US. And you can also not take your UK student loans to the US. You can, of course, take out a UK third-party loan, but those tend to have very high interest rates and very strict payback terms, maybe even requiring you to pay back loans before you've completed your studies. And so that's really a really final last resort. If you do have dual US citizenship, or you can also look into getting some federal aid from the US government through something called FAFSA. So to talk in more detail about university funding, this type of funding is ideal since it doesn't have to be paid back, And as I mentioned, there's two main types of funding, need-based aid and merit-based scholarship. Need-based aid is based on financial need, based on a family's annual income. And then merit-based scholarships are based on things like academic merit or sports scholarships in a particular sport. And so as you're investigating funding, you'll want to watch for information about whether the university makes these types of scholarships available to international students, because not all of them do. So in terms of the need-based aid, it's based on financial needs. So what happens is the university is going to calculate, based on your family's income, your expected family contribution, and then they're going to compare that to the total cost of attendance, and they're going to try to meet that gap. So for instance, let's say that a university costs $50,000 per year, and the university looks at your family's income and they determine that based on that, your family can afford to pay $20,000 per year. Then there's still $30,000 left per year to make up, to get to that $50,000. And so the university will try and kind of meet that. And so some universities will say, okay, we can meet 100% of that. We're going to give you all 30,000. Some universities are going to say, all right, we can only meet 50% of that. So we'll give you 15,000, which means that in addition to the 20,000 per year that you're already expected to pay, you're going to need to find an additional $15,000 per year in order to go. So you can see why it's important that if you're applying for this need-based aid and it's important for you to go, that you'll want to be applying to universities that offer to meet 100% of full need. For more information on university funding, you'll want to make sure that you're checking each university website and that you're being proactive to find all the information that you need. Luckily, the information for the process of applying for the financial aid is fairly straightforward, and it's integrated into the admission application. So it will be a matter of kind of following the instructions that are laid out on the university website. So now as an example, I'd like to show you a financial aid page from Rice University in Texas. And you can see on this page, it gives you a breakdown of not just the tuition and the room and board, but it also includes fees, books, personal expenses, such as flights home. They even have a Rice net price calculator to help find out how much need-based aid you might be able to receive. It is, obviously in dollars, but you could probably do some converting and get a bit of an idea of what kind of financial aid package you might be eligible for at the university. You can also find information about merit scholarships and the types of recipients. And you can see that it's at Rice University, the merit scholarship application is integrated into the admissions process, which is really nice that there's no additional components required for the applicants. There's also a page with funding information specifically for international students. And you can see that international students are considered for need-based aid, that 100% of demonstrated need is met with grant aid. And they use something called the CSS profile to gather information about a student's financial background to determine their financial aid package. So as I've mentioned, it's important to check each university website and whether the funding is available for international students, because as you might imagine, it really breaks our heart when somebody reaches out to us in the spring and shares that they've gotten into their dream US university, but they didn't realize that the university doesn't offer funding for international students. And it's really difficult to find a solution at that point. So if funding is important in consideration, make sure that you're incorporating it into this choosing process and only applying to the universities that offer it. And then a little bit more about external funding bodies and scholarships through them. So external funding bodies include a wide range of different professional, charitable, or government organizations that are external to a university. They can be thought of as niche scholarships, as they have specific criteria based on the mission of a funding body. So they might be based on a particular country of origin or ethnicity or religious faith, an interest in a particular field for maybe a gender-based scholarship, all those types of things. So if you're unique in any way, there's likely to be a funding body out there with a scholarship out there. You just have to find it. There are a variety of different scholarships that are out there. One example that we like to talk about is something that's called the Moorhead Cane. And the Moorhead Cane is a 4-year fully funded educational experience for students of the highest caliber at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. And they're specifically looking for students who meet the qualities of leadership, character, scholarship, and physical vigor. And in addition to fully funding the 4 years of education at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, the scholarship also offers fully funded summers. And so it's a really, interesting one. So that's just an example. The Moorhead Cane scholarship is one example of the different scholarships that are out there. But there are thousands of funding bodies that offer them. Searching through all these funding bodies does require time and dedication to sift through the different scholarship listings, to submit separate applications to each body. So for this reason, we do encourage students to first apply to university funding opportunities in the first instance, and then for external funding. And we do have a link on our website to the different scholarship search engines that are available to help you do some of this scholarship searching. And now just to talk a little bit about a funding strategy. There's a few different approaches to funding that you might take. One is that you could explore universities in places with a lower cost of living. Just as in the UK, it's going to be more expensive to live in London than it will be to live in Lancaster. In the US, it's going to be more expensive to live in New York or California than it will be to live in states like Ohio or Georgia. American universities, as I've mentioned, list their cost of attendance on their website, which is going to include the cost of living. So you'll be able to kind of scope out places that have lower costs of living as a way to kind of reduce the costs. You can also look at programs with lower tuition. So state universities in the US are universities that are funded by the state. And so they tend to have kind of lower tuition costs. Although something to be aware of is that state universities don't typically have loads of financial aid available for international students. And so while the cost of tuition might be lower, they might also just not have as much aid available. And then as a final strategy, we've also talked about different funding opportunities, such as funding through the university or those external funding bodies. I also want to mention something called community colleges here, which is something that you may not have heard of before. This is an increasingly popular choice in the US as an alternative pathway that can help save a lot of money. So a community college generally awards an associate's degree, which is something that's not really offered here in the UK. It's a degree that often has a professional vocational focus, and it takes 2 years to complete. So what students will do is they'll spend 2 years at a community college earning that associate's degree, and then they will transfer to a 4-year institution for their final 2 years to earn their bachelor's degree. So it's something that's called the 2+2 model. And a lot of community colleges actually have partnerships with universities in their area to kind of transfer directly from the community college to the 4-year institution. So for instance, you can see here, Los Angeles Valley College is a 2-year community college that has a partnership with universities like UCLA, University of Southern California, and Cal Poly. I'm a big supporter of community colleges because my husband went to one, and he was able to go to community college, and he actually worked full time at the same time to just kind of pay his tuition as he went. And then he transferred to a 4-year institution and completed his bachelor's degree in another 2 years. And he saved tons and tons of money by doing this, and didn't end up having to spend as much money or to take out as many loans in order to earn his degree. Community colleges are much less expensive than 4-year universities. So you can save thousands by paying the significantly lower tuition of the community college for 2 of the 4 years of being at university. They also have smaller class sizes, which can be especially valuable for those kind of introductory classes, and you get more contact time with professors. They also generally involve less rigorous application processes and entry requirements than a 4-year university. They almost never require an admissions exam. They also tend to accept students that might have BTECs or other similar qualifications. We do have more information about community colleges on our website. This is something you're interested in learning more about. And we recently led a webinar with a representative from a community college in the US, and that webinar is available on our website if you would like to check that out as well. So just some final funding tips here. Since applying for funding is simultaneous to the admissions process, you're going to want to make sure that you're beginning your search for funding early. It's going to take time to research funding at the schools where you want to apply, and also for any external scholarships that you want to apply for. As I've mentioned throughout, you'll make sure that you're checking those university websites, and then you can also use the online scholarship searches that we have a list of on our website in order to kind of search out different scholarship options. You may wish to consider having a funding strategy to fully fund your studies. You might need a combination of all the different types of funding that we've discussed here. And so you'll kind of want to think about the different ways that you'll be funding the studies in order to do that. It's going to be really important to remain flexible in choosing universities. If funding is something that's important to you, you'll want to make sure, for instance, that you're not just applying to a university where thousands of other British universities are applying, or to a university where you're not going to be competitive. You'll want to think about where you might be able to be a standout applicant, either with a really strong application or by being one of the only British students applying to that institution. And that can really help increase your chances of securing that funding. All right, so now that we've talked about choosing a university and funding your studies, we're going to talk about how to go about completing an application to a US university. So first, what are US universities looking for? And first and foremost, more than anything else, they're going to be looking at your academics, which are going to be measured by your results. So if you are in England, Wales, or Ireland, those GCSEs and A-levels, or if you are in Scotland, your National Fives and your Highers and any advanced Highers. They'll also look at admissions test scores. If that's something that's required, they'll also look at that. And again, sometimes the websites are going to list kind of information about their average applicant profile. And so you might be able to get a sense of how your grades and test scores compare to their average admitted applicants. However, academic achievement alone is not going to guarantee entrance to the most competitive universities. So that, having the top grades and having the top scores might, get your application through the door. But then I think we like to talk about, get you through the door to have to the dinner, but you might not have yet been invited to have a seat at the table for the dinner. So what I mean when I say that is that they're going to be looking at all aspects of your application. So the academic is going to be first and foremost, the most important part. And then after that, they're going to be looking at the holistic part of your application. So looking at things, for instance, such as your academic fit. So the reasons for pursuing a degree at their institution and maybe how it helps towards your goals. So for instance, perhaps you're somebody who'd like to go to New York and you are applying to Columbia University, and you talk all about how you want to be in New York, you love New York is great. The person reading your application at Columbia might say, okay, well, there's a lot of universities here in New York. Maybe you could go to NYU. Why are you applying to Columbia? And so you'll want to make sure that if there's a particular program that you're interested in, or maybe a campus activity or a particular mission of the institution that you're applying at, that you're able to incorporate that into your application and really demonstrating why that institution is a good fit for you. So the person reading that application understands that. They'll also look at your extracurriculars. As I mentioned, this is a big focus in the US. It doesn't mean that in order to apply to a US university, you have to be involved in everything and have loads and loads of extracurriculars. It just means that a US university is interested in what you do outside of the classroom. And that it can be all sorts of things. It isn't necessarily just like your traditional extracurriculars. It might be that you have a part-time job or that you have family responsibilities. And that's something that takes up your time. That's something that a US university is going to be interested in knowing, how you spend your time outside of the classroom. They'll also be looking, and as part of this holistic admissions process, at your personal attributes. They're looking to diversify their campuses and their classrooms and to create, they want to have a variety of different people on campus and making, they don't want all the same person. They want lots of different people. And so through your application, they're going to want to learn more about who you are. Perhaps if you already know what you want to study, you'll include some information in your interest in your academic field of choice. Perhaps through your application, they're going to get a sense of your character, maybe your leadership abilities. So really getting a sense of who you are as a person. And these are some of the application components. So I'll touch on these briefly, and then we'll go into some of them in a bit more depth in the following slides. So unlike the UK, which has UCAS, in the US, you're going to apply to each university individually rather than through a centralized body. And you can apply to as many as possible, as many as you'd like. Although for time and cost purposes, we usually recommend not applying to more than 6 to 10 institutions. There is something called the Common Application in the US, and that's something that about 900 universities use as a way to kind of help streamline some of the demographic information that's asked for in an application. It's not UCAS in the sense that you'll still have to tailor all of your applications to each university. They might have some different questions that they ask, maybe some supplementary essay questions, but it does maybe help streamline some of the process. There is unfortunately no standard process for applications or deadlines or requirements. It will vary by the university. Each university will set its own deadlines and application requirements, although they do tend to follow a similar format. And so you will be able to reuse or adapt the materials that you prepare for each. Most are going to include an application form with your basic demographic information, admissions exam scores if those are required, which we'll talk about in a bit more in detail in a bit, a transcript, we'll touch on that in a few slides, some essays, 2 to 3 recommendation letters, and also an application fee of about $50 to $100 per application, although many universities may offer the opportunity for a fee waiver if this is something that would prevent you from applying. So when we talk about admissions tests, the first thing that I want to mention is to first off check if they're even required, because especially under COVID times, a lot of universities might not make them required anymore, or they might make them optional. And there were a lot of universities that before COVID didn't require admissions exams. So if you are somebody who does not like the idea of an admissions exam, you don't want to do it, you don't want to study for it or pay for it or take it, the whole idea of it just stresses you out. There are a number of institutions in the US that don't require one. And so if that's something that you're looking for, you can specifically research institutions that don't require it, and you don't have to sit it. That being said, there are still some institutions that are requiring it. And as we hopefully move beyond COVID times, some universities are going to kind of be bringing that requirement back. And so I'll talk about them in a little bit more detail in case that's something that you're going to be pursuing. So first of all, the reason that they exist in the first place is that because in the US, there is no national curriculum at the secondary school level. And so admissions exams provide a way to evaluate applicants that come from diverse areas and schools throughout the US. So they created these standardized tests, these admissions tests for that purpose. If there is something that you are going to sit, you will typically sit it kind of in that summer after your penultimate year of high school, so kind of year 12, or maybe in the autumn of your final year before half term. And you will, if you are going to sit one, it's going to be either the ACT or the SAT exam. You will be able to choose which one you take. Universities don't care which one you take. It doesn't matter to them. So it's completely up to you. And so in terms of choosing between one or the other, one's not better than the other. It's actually just what's the best fit for you. What we usually recommend in order to figure this out is to go online and find a free practice test. You can usually find one online, and to take one of each under timed conditions and just see which one you do better in. So that can usually help you decide which one you want to study for. You can also take a look at kind of the testing dates and the locations of that are being offered, and see if that is something that you want to take into consideration as well. If you are somebody that does not want to take a test and you're looking for one of those test optional institutions or an institution that doesn't require it, a good website is fairtest.org. They have a list of the different test optional institutions. You'll just want to make sure, because some institutions might be test optional for domestic US students, but not for international students. So you'll just want to double check on the university website, that if it is test optional, that it is for international students as well. All right. I also want to talk a little bit about transcripts. So a transcript is a listing of your academic qualifications and your marks covering your final 4 years of school. So that'll be years 10 through 13 in England and Wales, 11 through 14 in Northern Ireland, and S3 through 6 in Scotland. This is something that's going to be generated by your school. Although if your school has never helped somebody apply to the US, it might be that you are needing to provide them with some information about what to include in the transcript, as well as any kind of additional school documents. Pardon me. If your school hasn't created this before, we do have templates available on our website. So you can go on there and find it and send it to them. You can send them to our website. But basically what this is going to include is the years that you've attended their school, what your GCSE scores were or your National 5 scores were, what subjects that you're sitting at A level or higher or advanced hires, and any kind of predicted grades in those subjects. Now, there is no direct conversion between UK and US marks, so you are going to report your marks in the British system. And most universities are just going to have you go ahead and submit that transcript online, and it will be your school that's submitting that. Some universities may also ask for a school report, which contains information about the school itself for context. And again, this is something that will be submitted by your school, and we have some templates available for this on our website that your school can use. And to talk a little bit more about recommendation letters, you're likely going to be required to gather 2 to 3 letters of recommendation for your application. And these should really be used as a marketing tool for you as an applicant. And though your referees might have particular areas that they can speak to, you might want to direct them to write about things such as your ability to succeed at university, your past academic performance, observations about your performance in class or in assignments, maybe your writing and critical thinking skills, your subject knowledge, your work experience, your ability to positively contribute to a university and to campus life, perhaps your leadership abilities and character, and your involvement in the school and community. You'll want to make sure that you're asking someone who knows you well, both in and out of the classroom for these. And the university might provide some loose guidelines for selecting your referees. They will typically ask for 1 letter from a counselor, which is not a role that typically exists in the UK, but typically somebody at your school that might be able to serve in that role might be like a head of sixth form, or a head of careers, or a form tutor, that kind of role. And then they'll also ask for a letter from a teacher, typically somebody who's either currently teaching you or has taught you in your final 2 years of high school. It is going to be your responsibility to choose and liaise with your referees and make sure that they're aware of all the deadlines and what's required. And you'd really want to consider meeting with them to discuss the letter. We would recommend that you waive your right to see your letter. It's actually something that's asked about in applications. And if you waive your right to see the letter, it kind of gives the letter more credibility in the eyes of the university who's reading that letter. But that being said, it is useful for you to meet with your referee and kind of help them write the best letter they can. In your meeting, you might want to discuss your reasons for doing an undergraduate degree, maybe your interest in the particular universities that you've selected, what your future goals are, your academic achievements, and any extracurricular involvement that they can make sure to include. Again, you'll want to make sure your referee is aware of deadlines and the paperwork to complete, and it'll be your responsibility to inform referees of the deadlines and any paperwork that's required. You'll want to encourage your referees to avoid being restrained and too modest. As you might imagine, American referees tend to write in a very enthusiastic tone. They use very positive and descriptive language to discuss the applicant both in and out of the classroom and to talk about the applicant personally. So the person who's writing the reference is going to want to keep in mind what's going to be written about the American students when they're preparing your letters. So just kind of make sure that you're encouraging them to write very enthusiastically and avoid using restrained or modest language. I'd also like to talk a little bit more about essays. This is one of the most important parts of the application process for undergraduate study in the US, especially if you're applying to one of those top universities where all of the students have the top grades and the top test scores. An essay is something that can really help set you apart from other applicants. And it really gives you an opportunity to showcase yourself to the university. Pardon me. Now, this is not your UCAS personal statement. It's not just submitting an application of your interests and your achievements in a particular field of study. Instead, you're going to be asked to respond between 1 and 3 essay questions on the US university application. Now, each university will set its own questions as well as their desired length for the response. However, if you are using the Common App system to apply to a number of universities, there will be one main essay question that goes to all universities, and then there may be some supplemental questions which are unique to each institution. And there are a number of different prompts on the Common application that you can choose to write that one main essay. So I'm just going to share a couple of them with you now, just as an example. So one of those prompts is to reflect on a time when you questioned or challenged a belief or idea. What prompted your thinking? What was the outcome? Another example, describe a topic, idea, or concept you find so engaging that it makes you lose all track of time. Why does it captivate you? What or who do you turn to when you want to learn more? So as you can see from those prompts, they're really giving you an opportunity to talk a little bit more about who you are, maybe including something, that they're hoping that you're going to include something in this essay that's not coming across anywhere else yet in the application. What I hear most from admissions representatives about what they want to see in the essay is they want to learn something new about you that they haven't seen anywhere else. And they want to get an understanding of who you are. So this is really an opportunity for you to do that. It's unlikely, if you're being asked lots of different questions, that you're going to be able to compose one essay that's going to answer, all the different essay prompts. But many students are able to reuse elements of essays for different universities. Some writing tips that we offer are, first off, ensure that you address the question fully. It seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how sometimes somebody can get carried away with what they're writing and they forget to actually address the question. I'm sure, that happens with us sometimes when you're answering a question for somebody and you just kind of forget how you got there and if you actually answered the question in the first place. Make sure that you're using clear, concise language and avoiding vague or empty statements or cliches. If you do reuse an essay, be really careful to submit the correct essay to the correct university and program and double check that all references within the text are to the correct university. You don't want to say, I can't wait to be at ABC University when actually you're applying to XYZ University. Make sure that you're proofreading extensively and asking others to proofread your essays and offer their feedback. And most importantly, be yourself. Don't give the admissions officers the answers that you think that you want them to hear. Give them the truth. And you'll really want to think about what sets you apart and let your personality come through in the essay. There are more tips on our website and links to example essays on university websites as well. So you can read some kind of examples of those. So now that we've talked about the application process and actually just the choosing, the funding, and the application process, I want to touch a little bit about other opportunities in the US because maybe you've decided that maybe you don't want to do a whole 4 years in the US, or perhaps you apply to a US university and it just doesn't work out the way that you would like it to. So I just want to make you aware of the other opportunities that are available to you. So one of those opportunities is, as I mentioned very briefly earlier, is you can go to the US while at a UK university through university exchange programs. So many UK universities have established exchange programs with US universities or US-based study abroad programs. The University of Manchester, for example, has partnerships with 18 universities in the US. And this might end up being logistically simpler because your university can help you arrange doing that year abroad. We also have something called the Study of the US Institutes that you can take a look at on our website. These are for student leaders. The Study of the US Institutes for Student Leaders is what they're called. They're intensive short-term academic programs whose purpose is to provide groups of undergraduate student leaders with a deeper understanding of the US while simultaneously enhancing their leadership skills. Or if you really love America, you can spend your degree studying it. American Studies programs often incorporate a year in the US as well. And if that's something that you are interested in, we're actually hosting a webinar next week about American Studies degrees in the UK. And we will have some faculty members from a couple of UK universities, as well as some students who have spent a year abroad in the US coming and speaking on that webinar. So you can find the details for that on our website. There's also internships and summer work available through things like Camp America, where you can go and be a camp counselor in the US for the summer. Or you might decide that you'd like to pursue postgraduate study in the US. And you can always come back to us at that point, watch another one of our webinars or attend one of our talks. We also offer Fulbright awards at the postgraduate level, so you can apply for some funding at the postgraduate level as well. I'd also like to talk about some of the ways that we can help here at Education USA and at the US-UK Fulbright Commission. The first thing that I want to mention is the Sutton Trust US program. So if you are a student who is currently in year 12 or the equivalent, so year 13 in Northern Ireland, S5 in Scotland, I believe, this could be a program for you. That's a program for high achieving students from low income families who are currently at state schools. And the program offers the opportunity to visit US universities, COVID accepting, over the summer. And it also offers the opportunity to apply for support, to apply for undergraduate study in the US. It is a free program for students who are accepted. And so you get the chance to go to the US for a week for free, provided that COVID allows for that next summer. And then the program itself, it has a number of other residentials and online events that provide all sorts of support for anybody who's interested in kind of exploring the idea of US study. And this is a program that is run, as the name implies, in partnership with the Sutton Trust. I also, if you haven't already, highly recommend that you spend some time on our websites. Under this Going to the USA section, we've got our undergraduate guide with details on everything that I've talked about this evening, but in much more detail, choosing, funding, and applying. And so definitely spend some time on the website checking that out. There's a ton of information that you can find there. We also take questions by email. And so if there's a question that you think of after the Q&A this evening, or as you're going through the process, or as you're looking on our website, you can write to us. We check our inbox Monday through Friday. And so you can go ahead and reach out to us if you have any questions as you go. And we also offer one-to-one video appointments with an advisor. And so you can book an appointment to speak with myself or one of my colleagues. And you'd be able to come and kind of ask any more specific questions that you have if you're trying to learn more about studying in the US and the process of doing that. And in order to get kind of all of the information of how to go about doing that, how to email us, how to book this appointment, you can go to our website, fulbright.org.uk, and just visit the Contact Us page and just kind of scroll down and you'll find all the information on there. We also have a number of events about studying in the US. At the moment, all of those events are online, but hopefully they will be returning back to in-person as soon as possible. So for instance, like I said, next week, we've got an American Studies webinar that we'll be hosting. We're hoping to host a sustainability webinar in December, so keep an eye out for that. And if you're on our mailing list, then you'll also be informed of kind of any upcoming events. We also have our USA College Days. Some of you may have attended it this past September in its virtual format. We're hoping that it will return to an in-person event next year in September of 2022. It's usually kind of the end of the month, kind of around that last Friday and Saturday of September. So the dates haven't been set just yet. It's a free fair. We have representatives from over 100 US universities that come to the UK. And you can meet with them and talk with them. And attendee registration for that will open up in late summer. All right, so without further ado, we have gotten to the Q&A portion of the evening. If you do have any questions, go ahead and start popping those in the box now, the Q&A box. I do ask that you try to keep the questions quite general so that they're useful to anybody who's attending this evening. If you have anything that's quite specific, please do feel free to email us. I can also pop our email address into the chat. And you can email us any kind of specific questions there. And just as a reminder, the recording will be sent around if you need to head off and can't stay for this Q&A part. And I thank you for joining us this evening. But if you are able to stay for the Q&A, go ahead and put those questions in the box. So I'll just stop sharing my screen for this part. And come on up. And I also just wanted to share with you the link to that American Studies webinar next week in case you're interested in attending that. So I'll just put that in the chat now. All right, so I've got some questions coming through. Somebody has asked about what universities offer full scholarships for international students. And so that's a good question if that's something that you're interested in. And what I recommend is going back to that Big Future college search that we took you through an example of earlier in the presentation. And if you go to that Big Future website, under the affordability section on that website, you can select that you would like to attend a university that meets 100% of demonstrated need. And then you'll want to check the box to say that they offer financial aid for international students. And that will kind of narrow that list down for you. Something to keep in mind is that if you are somebody who is looking for kind of that full cost of attendance to be covered by the university, it is going to be extremely competitive. And so you'll want to make sure that you do have kind of the top grades. If exam scores are required, that you've got the top exam scores and that you are putting together a really competitive application and doing your research. Again, trying to maybe apply to universities that not every British student is applying to. Another question, do teachers and schools need to submit recommendations directly to the Common Application or to provide to the student on paper? So typically the teachers in the school will be submitting those recommendations and any other school forms like the transcript or the school profile to the Common Application directly, provided that the university uses the Common Application. If the university has a different application system, then the school and teacher will be submitting to that application system. Pardon me. But it won't be that the student is getting the information and passing it on. It will be the school and the teachers putting it directly into the Common App or to the application system. We've had somebody who's asked about employment after completing your studies in the US, being able to be employed in the US. And so typically, if you have a student visa, the student visa that you would have to attend for an undergraduate degree is typically, I believe, an F1 visa. And you would have, after you complete your studies, you have something called the OPT, which is a one-year visa to stay on working in the US for an additional year. And I think it can go, you'll have to double check, but I think it can go for maybe 2 or 3 years if you're in a specific like STEM field, depending. So it allows you the opportunity to kind of work in the field that you studied, basically. on a visa. So it's something that's really, a big reason that students are interested in going to the US for that aspect. And then after that visa ends, the expectation is that you would return to your home country. So we have a couple of different questions about sports scholarships and what that process is like. And so what I would recommend actually is if you go to our website, Fulbright.org.uk, we actually have a whole section about athletic scholarships and what the process is involved for that, including a webinar that we led with the NCAA that can kind of provide they're kind of the experts when it comes to sports scholarships and can kind of provide the most up-to-date advice and information there. So what I would really recommend if you are interested in learning more about sports scholarships is going to that page on our website. But what I can tell you here is that it is, again, a process that you want to start early. It's another component of research. It involves putting together kind of like a sports CV and reaching out to a number of different institutions. And so we've got a whole checklist on our website of the kind of different steps that you can follow. And so I would recommend kind of checking that out. And the other question that was related to sports scholarships is, do you still apply through the same system? And so if you are applying for a sports scholarship, you are still completing an application to the university just the same way that any other student would be completing an application to a university. So it could be through the Common App if the university accepts that, or through whatever the application is that the university uses. It might just also be that if you're in contact with a particular coach at that institution, that they might also give you some further instructions that you would follow as part of the application process. Are all subjects at A level accepted by US universities? So that's a good question. And so A level subjects are considered to kind of be, rigorous subjects in the US. And so they are expecting students to, if you're applying to some of the more competitive institutions in the US, they're going to be expecting to see students completing about 3 to 4 different A levels subjects. And oftentimes they're going to be looking for students to be taking subjects that are called kind of the core subjects. So that's your maths, your sciences, your English, your history, the social sciences, languages, and those kind of core subjects are going to be considered ones that are the most rigorous and what they're looking for. And that's just something that US universities want to see, so that they can make sure they believe that those classes are what's going to best prepare students to complete a degree at their institution. So typically that's what they'll be looking for. But if you have any specific questions about your subjects, you can always reach out to a university that you're interested in and ask them those questions. And I'm sure that they'd be willing to give you some information. Somebody has asked how you join the Fulbright mailing list. And so you would have been asked when you signed up for this webinar, but you can also go ahead and email us in that email address that I put in the chat, advising@fulbright.org.uk, and just ask to be added to the mailing list. And we can also make sure that you get added that way if you're not already added. Somebody has asked the difference between need blind and need aware. And so these might be terms that you have heard of before when talking about US admissions. So what that means, so a need blind university is an institution that doesn't take the amount of financial aid a student would require into consideration when making an admissions decision. And there's a very small number of institutions that are need blind. I think it's maybe like only 4 or 5 of them. So you can Google them to find out what they are, because I'd hate to give you the wrong information. I think I know them off the top of my head, but I don't want to get it wrong and then have put wrong information in your head. But basically, need blind means that they are looking at your application and they're not taking into consideration whether you require financial aid. Need aware means that if you are applying for need-based financial aid, that is something that they are taking into consideration as part of whether or not they're going to give you an admissions offer. Because what they don't want, the universities that are offering these types of aid, they don't want to admit you and then know that your family can't afford it. So if a university is offering this kind of aid, then they're taking that into consideration in the admissions process. And so if a university is need aware, what that means is if you're applying for financial aid, they'll be looking at a pile of students that are all applying for financial aid, and they only have a set amounts of money that they are able to award to students. And then that does play a factor in their admissions decision. So this is again why it's important if you are applying for that need-based financial aid to make sure that and if you need kind of if you're expecting to need kind of cover the full cost of attendance at a US university, it is going to be kind of the most competitive. You want to make sure you're being really flexible and strategic with where you're applying. The other question that went along with that was whether need aware means that they'll pay for all your tuition if it's needed. And so in a sense, yes. So again, a university is going to look at your family's finances, things such as your family's income, and they're going to determine how much your family can afford to pay. And then they'll compare that to their cost of attendance. And it's, as I mentioned earlier, it is based off of what they believe your family can afford to pay versus what your family is willing to pay. And so, you might have a certain amount of money earmarked for kind of family holidays each year or something like that. And a university might very well see that as money that can go towards a university tuition. And so that's just something to kind of keep in mind. But if a university is saying that they're going to meet 100% of demonstrated need, then they will try, determine what your family can afford to pay, and they will cover the cost of the rest of it. And it is kind of going to vary. A financial aid package is going to vary from institution to institution. And so if you end up being lucky enough to receive multiple offers, it might be that you're kind of comparing those different offers and seeing which of those financial aid packages is actually the best one, and going to the university that offers the best financial aid. If anybody is here as a postgraduate student, this is a study in the US for our undergraduate students. We do offer a number of postgrad webinars as well. And so I believe we have one coming up on the 8th of December. And so if you were hoping to learn more about postgrad studies, I'm seeing a couple of questions in the chat related to postgrad. You can go to our website and sign up for that on the 8th of December. We also have previous postgrad webinars available on our YouTube channel. So if you're not able to wait until the 8th of December because you're hoping to apply as soon as possible, you can see one of our previous recorded webinars there. I have a couple more questions about the ACT and the SAT and what the difference is. And so just to give you a little bit more information on these exams, they're multiple choice exams. I believe the ACT might offer an option for writing, but you'll want to check to see if it's required to kind of have this writing portion at the institutions where you're applying. If it's not required, you don't need to sit that. And it's typically in subjects of mathematics and kind of English and reading. And so it's a matter of kind of preparing for and studying for this kind of multiple choice exam. And so if you go to our website, we do actually have information on how to kind of revise for the exam. There's a lot of resources that are available online. You can buy a book to help with your revision. It is possible to pay a tutor to help you with that, although it can be quite expensive. And so that isn't necessarily something you have to pursue. There is a lot of free information, or buying a book, which is more low cost than paying a tutor. So there is a lot of information about the ACT and SAT for free available online. In terms of what kind of score you need to be admitted, you'll want to take a look at the different institutions. Often that information is published, kind of their average range or their average score of their admitted applicants. If it's something that they require, is available on their website. So you can take a look at the different websites to find out what that information is. As you might imagine, for some of the most highly competitive, ultra competitive universities, the score needs to be quite high. Just taking a look. We've had a couple of questions about of the Sutton Trust US program, which I had talked about, and when applications open for that. If you are interested in the Sutton Trust US program and you're eligible to apply for that, the applications should open at some point this month, and they will close in January. We also have some questions about the Fulbright Awards. The Fulbright Awards, unfortunately, are only available at the postgraduate level. And so if you are looking to pursue undergraduate study in the US, you wouldn't be able to apply for a Fulbright Award at the undergraduate level. That is something at postgrad level. What do you do about recommendations if you have left school? And so if you're somebody who's already left school, you would, depending on how long ago you've been in school, it might be that you go back to your school and ask for those recommendations. You know, it's not uncommon for a student who's on a gap year to decide to apply to a US university and be needing to go back to their school to ask for those recommendations. That's okay. If you're somebody who's been out of school for quite a while and maybe don't have contacts with you know, former teachers, it might be that you want to reach out to the institutions where you're applying and ask for advice from them and see what they would best advise you in that situation, because it'll probably depend on the university. Somebody has asked, when they finish their studies in the US, would they be able to use their university qualifications to work in the UK? And the answer to that is absolutely. You know, a bachelor's degree from the US is, you know, considered equivalent to a bachelor's degree from the UK. And just as there are thousands of universities in the US that maybe you haven't heard of before, I think you will be an expert on your institution after you've attended there for 4 years, and you'll be able to talk about it, I'm sure, with a passion in any kind of interview. And I know I've spoken with people about what my job is here in the UK, and somebody that I spoke to once said, you know, if I saw somebody come across my desk and I saw that they had studied at a university in the US, I would be really interested in interviewing them, because to me, the fact that they've gone to a university in the US means that they've taken that initiative to go and do something a little bit different and, you know, a little bit challenging. They've probably stepped out of their comfort zone to seek that out and to go, you know, to go across an ocean for a university. And that's something that, you know, I want to see in my employees, somebody who's kind of willing to take that initiative, take those risks, and put themselves out there. And so, yeah, definitely you'll be able to use your university qualifications to work in the UK. If you're somebody who's attending who is currently taking BTECs, it is possible to apply to US universities. As I mentioned earlier, you might want to consider looking at community colleges in the first instance and checking out our page on our website about community colleges and the webinar that we recently held about that. That can be kind of a really good option to start out and study at a US university, at a community college for 2 years, and then transfer to a 4-year institution to complete that bachelor's degree. Typically, a lot of US universities do require A-levels or the equivalent, but there may be some of some universities that have less rigorous admissions requirements may accept BTECs. Something to be aware of is that the possibility of financial aid might be a bit more tricky at this level. So again, community college that has those much lower fees may be a better option for you. Somebody has asked about how to take the LSATs. The LSATs are an exam for law school in the US, which as I mentioned earlier, are only offered at the postgraduate level. And so that's not something that you would take in order to apply to undergrad in the US. And if you are somebody who is looking to maybe transfer from you're currently at a UK institution and want to transfer to a US institution, all of the information that we've provided in this webinar this evening is still relevant to you, but something to be aware of is that financial aid can be a bit trickier. If you're looking for financial aid in order to attend, it can be a bit trickier at the transfer level. And so it's something, again, that you'll want to check in each university website that you're applying to see what they offer for transfer students. And depending on how, what classes you've completed, it might be that some of your classes in the UK will transfer, but it might be that not all of them do, and it will just depend on the university. All right. So I think that was the last question. Yeah. And so if you think of any questions after we've finished, you can go ahead and email us at advising@fulbright.org.uk, or if you would like to book an advising call with myself or one of my colleagues, you can go to the contact page on our website and scroll all the way down to the bottom to book a video call with one of us. But thank you all for joining in this evening. And I'm glad that thank you for being patient with my cough and those couple of times that I had to go off screen. I'm glad that I was able to make it to the end. And I hope that you all have a lovely evening, and I will send round the recording to you all soon. Have a good night. Bye.